Hi, I'm going to do a few watercolor videos here, really focusing in on values. I'm going to be using just one paint, and that is, well, you can't read it. This is a neutral tint. It's by M. Graham. I think their neutral tint is the prettiest and stays fairly nice and dark even when it dries. So I'm going to be doing a few videos focused on practicing a few different things and really honing in on doing large washes, really kind of understanding values and how to achieve really intense range of values. Oftentimes when you're sort of just learning about a certain color, it's pretty common to test things out, and it's a perfectly acceptable way to try to do sort of a concentrated swatch of a color first, and then add water, and then add some more water, and then add some more water, which tells you a lot about the color, but really doesn't tell you the potential range. And if it doesn't show up in the video, this is quite a bit darker and more intense than this. And that's because I'm going to use a layered approach for figuring this out. So it's going to be all fun and stuff. And the brushes I'm going to be using are, my new favorite brush is this Da Vinci Casaneo, which according to them is all synthetic. I don't believe it. No, I believe it. But manufacturers and makers have been saying forever that their synthetic brushes are so similar to Kolinsky Sable that you'll never know the difference. And that really has never been true, at least in my experience. But I'm finding these are, if not the same, then darn close. So I'm digging these brushes, and they are synthetic, which is nice on the critters. So what I'm going to be doing is just using this one color, like I said, neutral tint. I'm going to squeeze some out here on just a white paper plate. So you'll be able to see just how big, just what it looks like when I'm mixing up a certain amount of paint, a certain size puddle, a certain size, a certain wateriness. Let me start with about that. Okay. So this first part is going to sound kind of silly, but I'm going to do a value study here. And what I'm going to do with this first column here is nothing. I'm going to leave it white, which is a critical aspect of watercolor painting. Not always, but it's something to just get into the habit of, before you start painting anything, deciding what you're not going to paint, what you're just going to leave as the white of the paper. So for this study, this column is going to be the white of the paper. And what I'm going to do for this study, since I've already finished my first column, is I'm going to come in and address this big rectangle with a really watery and light value of this neutral tint. The fact that I am leaving this one column white and I'm sort of talking about it and thinking about it, it is a little bit off, and that another first thing you need to remember is that we're going to approach the largest shapes first, and then go to smaller shapes. And we're going to start with the lightest colors, values, and then go to darker. So I suppose in a good way what would be good to imagine is that indeed first I've started with the biggest shape here, and I've painted the whole thing white watercolor paper. Also known as not painting anything. So now I'm going to come back to the second biggest shape, the next size smaller. I'm going to try to mix up way too much because it's really easy to not mix up enough. Makes it easier if you're just dealing with one color like this to mix up a little extra if you find yourself needing some. So what I'm going to do is, just like if you've seen me do swatches, this is sort of a large version of painting swatches. I want to make sure this is plenty watery. I could, what might be smart is to test it like that. And indeed, that'll be fine. So I'm going to come in and do my sort of blob in some paint like this. I'm holding the board so I can be in charge of how much tilt there is and how much all this watery color will run down or not run down. And I'm just going to define this rectangle. I'm using the number 12. It's a good size for this size shape. Best to use as big of a brush as you can manage. And I'm making sure that I get this this bead of this row of pooling watery paint. And it's good to be able to come back in this shape, this rectangle that I'm painting, and if I want to add some more paint like that. This paper is a 140-pound cold press. It's nothing fancy. It's a Dick Blick house brand. I'm not sure who makes it. But I'm just going to keep going like this. I'm going to keep you'll notice I consistently go back and refill. And I'm able to continue to get all this paint cascading down and mixing with the help of gravity. Then once I get to the bottom of this shape, I'm going to start getting rid of some of this, the excess paint in my brush. I'm going to try sort of squeezing out, just saving all this paint. So a faster way to do that is to just get the paint out of your brush on a towel and create what's called a thirsty brush. I'm going to come back here and finish this. So a thirsty brush will start being more like a sponge and will be picking up, soaking up the rest of that color. There's some back and forth, because I'm going to come back here and try to refine a little bit. The reason why I kept putting paint up at the top was just so I'm trying to manage this whole this whole rectangle. I'm trying to get the amount of paint and water in that whole rectangle to be consistently distributed. And that is fine for now. Over in this corner is not perfect, but I'm going to be okay with that. So, if I think about that wash applying to this little pretend painting here, little composition, it's basically a few hills in the background, and these shapes are going to represent some groups of trees, tree lines, but basically I'm just going to make sure I'm applying the values of my study to this idea. So what I'm going to do first is address the biggest shape just like I did here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that my sky is going to be white, the white of the paper. So I'm not going to paint the sky. I may come back and sort of paint a little bit. But first I'm just going to start with the next biggest shape, which includes everything except the sky, with my lightest wash. And I might try to go even lighter than this. Let me see, I'm trying to count like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, I think it should be, I'll try to keep it pretty darn similar. But, you know, this is arbitrary number of steps, and we'll get to making some pretty intense darks. But I'm going to just come over here, and much like the swatch, I'm just going to imagine that this combination of shapes is one complex compound swatch. And I'm going to keep going back and getting a little bit more paint and introducing it towards the top of the shape so that as I'm tilting it, it will keep cascading down. And now I am here. I'm going to keep sort of dropping some in. So I'm trying to keep that whole shape consistently wet across the whole thing. It's a little bit easier to do with nicer paper, but it's still quite doable. Just go nice and slow and make sure to have a big enough brush, enough watery color mixed up. It's really important to have the kind of brush that acts like a natural hairbrush that will hold a lot of water and paint. I'm making a little bit of a thirsty brush there. I didn't quite finish this shape. I see a rogue dot there, so I'm going to panic. No, I'm not. But let me see if I can demonstrate what one way of dealing with something like that would be. One way would be just like to throw the whole thing away. I'm not going to do that. I'm adding a smaller brush with just some water. I'm going to try dropping some water in with that little drop, runaway drop. Oh look, there's some more over there. I'm not going to worry about those. This is going to be kind of cool actually. So then I just sort of dilute it and then take a paper towel to it. If I took a paper towel, maybe I'll show, yeah, that'd be a good idea. If I took a paper towel just to this, if I press in, it might sort of just press the color into the paper as opposed to diluting it first. And then soaking it up. It's better. This is at a stage where it's really easy to get caught up into tiny things like that, and try to let go of that, because it's more big picture things that we're after. So I'm going to call that good for the first video, and I'm going to dry it, and I'll come back and do some more.